a number of people who want to use science now, not as an issue to look at concerns, or I should say, look at data and evidence, but they want to use science to manipulate society, to create changes in society. So that's one issue.
Is there a specific standard that relates to?
Yes, there is.
Okay, and can you point that out to us?
I don't have that one in front of me, but I will be glad to get that to you. Okay. Although I will, the next part that I want to have a show concern over is the standard Bio 4.1, which is really the heading of a number of these. And let me give you, in that standard, it says that all life, paraphrasing, there is a common ancestry of all life, and this is shown with multiple lines of evidence. And we could go through those evidence, and I could actually show scientific papers, peer-reviewed scientific papers that give a different perspective on this. And one of these issues that I want to bring up real quickly is you've probably heard it said that human DNA is only 2% different from chimp DNA, our alleged common ancestor, closest common ancestor, our cousin. And actually, you can go to a number of databases yourself and look at the length of the chimp DNA, and it's actually based on slight deviations with subspecies, 12.5% longer than human DNA. Okay, so here we're supposed to be only 2% different. It's actually, chimp DNA is actually 12.5% longer. Well, so there's actually more to the story than that, than just only 2% difference. In addition to that, there are some people who recognize that Y chromosome genetic sequences are almost identical. Now, Y chromosome being just a guy thing, a male thing. It's recognized that it's almost identical over the whole world between Y chromosomes from all populations. So there was a study that went out and said, let's look at the Y chromosome and compare that with human and chimpanzee. And so
and just let me focus you back on a standard. So I'm looking at standard 4.1.
Right.
Is there another point after that? Or this 4.1 is organisms functioning in their environment?
That's not
no. Bio 4.1 is identify patterns that show the common ancestry.
So it's bio.4.1.
It's on
so
page.
keep scrolling. You're probably in fourth grade.
Okay.
Can we get page numbers on this?
They actually are.
Oh, here it is.
45.
It's not showing on mine.
Okay.
Okay.
I'll fix that.
So anyway, looking at the Y chromosome, what they did is they sequenced both the chimpanzee and the human Y chromosome, and they allowed for differences that would still give similar functionality. For example, they allow for any particular gene to be relocated anywhere on the other Y chromosome, and they call it a match. They also allowed for a certain number of variations within that Y chromosome, and they would still call it a match. And even with all those concessions, instead of the 2% difference that they expected, they only could come up with 70% similarity, just 70%. That's the same kind of similarity they expected between a human and a rooster. And so there is other competing data that challenges all of those things mentioned as supposed evidence for evolution. And you can find certain lines that do fall along an evolutionary compatible path. But you also, if you look, can find many other areas that tend to discount that tend to even falsify it. And that's another area that's missing in this whole section, is that we didn't see any concepts of falsification. Anyway, I could go on more, but I don't want to take all your
Board
time.
member Gravitt has a
And
comment.
I just wanted to ask for clarification because, and maybe this is just my interpretation, but as I look at bio 4.1, to me, it doesn't, it doesn't specify like 2%, for example. It does exactly what you are suggesting, like to evaluate, to obtain information, to seek it out, and to
Read it word for word, if you would, please.
obtain, evaluate, and communicate information to identify patterns.
To identify.
But yeah, patterns that
That-
show that common ancestry and biological evolution are supported by multiple lines of evidence, such as similarities in DNA sequences, amino acid sequences, anatomical structures, the fossil record, and order of appearance of structures during embryological development.
Okay, where's the objectiveness in this?
To me, it reads objectively, and I guess that's why I wanted some clarification, because to me, it's like you seek out, you use the
You
scientific.
find this to be true, not is evidence for and against. Let's take a look at the evidence for and against.
To me, it does that, but that's why I was asking for
Elisa,
clarification.
That was going to be my
Mhm.
not the same as yours, but looking at it the other way, because as I'm reading it and I'm trying to think of another way, because no one wants to say we don't want to teach our kids that this philosophy and this theory is out there. No one's saying that, but I agree that we need to create an environment where kids
Mhm.
can question everything's out on the table.
Yes.
But I don't feel like it does
Oh,
because
see,
it
to
says,
me, it does.
show that common ancestor. So this is basically leading the witness, in my opinion, the way it's phrased.
But it doesn't show the common ancestor. It doesn't say the
Yes, it
specifics.
says identified patterns that show. So it seems to me like if there's any argument against it, that you would have to reword that standard to allow, especially when we test standards. When we
Yeah.
test standards, to pass the test, you're going to have to come up with this conclusion that everything shows this result. And so it doesn't, in my opinion, it doesn't leave this open world for science exploration. It leads to exploration and the obtain, evaluate, and communicate and identify to our conclusion, not to both sides.
Okay.
That's my opinion.
It's
So I'll
interesting
think of,
because I do.
Well,
see
I'm
both
gonna try
sides.
to think of
I
how
do.
to,
Yeah.
if I have a
Well,
suggestion to reword.
So I'm just thinking of a suggestion. So, what if we put such as similarities and differences in DNA sequences and amino acid sequences?
I
That's
think
just
you're on
something,
the right track.
that's just,
Yeah.
But I
okay.
think we need to ask the experts.
All right,
You know.
then let's go ahead and.
Well, but we have public
this
comment for a
gentleman
reason.
come-
You want me to go to the table or what?
Yes, I want you to come to the table, and Vince will excuse you. Thank you for your input. And this is Dwayne Jeffrey.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, I'm emeritus faculty member in genetics and evolutionary biology from BYU. And this is not the place, I think, to really go into a lot of molecular DNA, a lot of molecular genetics. Mr. Neumeier is correct, that 2% thing got kicked around early on. It was based only on the protein coding genes, not the entire set of genetic systems. And it got picked up by the media and blown vastly out of context. I reflect on a book written by an ethicist that said, what does it mean to be 98% chimp? And he said, please remember, you're also 23% banana.
Right. Right.
That gets to the question of what do the differences really mean?
Right.
And it's just to get to the comparison thing, I guess. If you look at the comparisons, humans are most similar to chimpanzees and bonobos. The next closest one is gorillas. The next closest comparison to humans is orangutan. It's not roosters. They have a totally different system. Then the next closest is the lesser apes. That precisely fits the story in the fossil record as to the developmental time when all these organisms showed up and split from common ancestry. There's a reason that we push common ancestry, and that has to do with the fact of medicine, conservation, and everything else. But people need to know that their genetic system is the same genetic system as every other form of life. It happened as a possibility of RNA viruses, etc. our whole rationale for conservation biology, for instance, for experimentation in medicine, have to do with the fact of the commonality of the genetic systems of all living things. That's a powerful concept. And we can then look at the relatedness of that, and the relatedness issues, as I indicated, fit the fossil record right down the line. Evidence against, yes, there's always evidence against. But the concept of teaching the evidence for and the evidence against is a buzzword. It's been used all across the country by anti-science, creationist groups, intelligent design groups, to try to put their own material into the education systems. And the courts have not found that a particularly persuasive argument.
Okay, Lisa, you have a question?
Yeah, I just had a question about this. So, first of all, I want to say, just because someone looks at something differently, I wouldn't call them anti-science. I think we just need to be cautious to not throw things like that around. But my question on, you said that we push common ancestry for medical purposes. And so, to me, aside from the statement that you made about anti-science, that it would benefit people to see, the similarities and differences. So when you're talking about how different the human DNA is from the rooster, to me, it seems like that would be a positive thing for students to be able to see those similarities and the differences between different species. And if I'm not using correct scientific terms, please forgive me.
I'm not sure I'm following where you're taking that.
Well, just without using the correct terminology, we were talking about how we were similar to a chimpanzee, but completely different than a rooster. And to me, it just seems like it would be good, because sometimes people take this theory of evolution and it's like people jump saying, okay, well, we could have turned from here to there. I'm talking about laymen that aren't looking at it from a scientific perspective. A lot of people are like making big leaps, like we can evolve anywhere. And so to me, it seems like showing similarities and differences would be a benefit.
Well, I think that might get to which level of education we want to be discussing. There's a tremendous concern right now about the Chinese chap that just genetically engineered a couple of girls. And that's not just a dispute among the ordinary public. It's coming from the scientists themselves. The science tends to be self-correcting. They argue about things as vehemently as anybody you might mention. But it is self-correcting, and when we first got into the big series of DNA and molecular and genetic engineering, it was the scientists who got together and said, look, we need some rules on this at the Asilomar conference back in the 80s or so. And when it got to some of the newer techniques, such as CRISPR that is put in here, and that the guy just used in China to put in or to alter genes for HIV resistance, it was the scientists again that got together and said, we really need some rules on this. And general public has not shown any real interest in doing that sort of thing that the scientists have. And they are the ones who are really going after this fellow in China right now and saying, you need some very, very severe punishment for this. My suspicion is he's going to be barred from publications for a while and maybe several years. My suspicion is that the funding agencies will strip him of any funding because he has gone beyond it. Scientists are trying to be concerned about this, but this is not something I think for maybe high school, maybe advanced placements. Maybe you could talk about some of these there, but it gets pretty hairy in a hurry.
Okay. Thank you. Let's look to the audience or others who'd like to give input on the science standards. Would you? Is it Emily?
Ashley.
Ashley.
Yeah.
From Alpine, right?
Yes, Ashley.
Thank you.
I would like to speak to the process you have in place, and I think that it would be great because of the conversation that's happening here this shows the importance of public input and the importance of teacher input and parent input and outside educational outreach groups, their input, charters, anyone who has an interest and wants to put forth the effort to have comments needs to have that opportunity. And this is the starting point for that, right? Where these standards are then approved by this group to go to the full board. I would just say, let's please move this process forward because of the experience I've had being on the 8th grade writing team and going through the process there and seeing what we started with, and then seeing all of the input from the state school board, from the community at large, and what we ended up with. It was such a stronger product than what we initially had. And I've also been a lead writer for the Earth Science Standards for this round. And I know, I absolutely know we have revisions that need to be made. And I can't wait to hear what people have to say in regard to what is in Earth Science specifically, because that's something I'm passionate about, so that we can take it back and make it that much better, so that our students really do have a great set of learning standards to become the type of critical consumers we want them to be in our future. So that's what
Thank you
Thank you.
very much. Others who want to give us some input? Anyone?
Can I make follow-up comments?
Well, I'd like to give everyone a chance to speak. So before we start doubling up.
So I haven't seen this new standards. I'm just wondering, so they will be released to the general public, excuse me, pending a vote of this session?
No.
So they need to pass through our committee first. And then our committee next month will make a recommendation to the board if there's a majority of our committee in favor. If not, it will go to the full board without an endorsement from this committee, but will still be discussed by the full board.
Okay, it will remain internal until then.
No,
Yes.
they're public.
You can.
You can access
You
them right
you
now.
can access them now.
Oh, yeah.
On the state U.S.
Can you
Office of
explain how to
Education
get
website.
up there?
Yeah.
Yeah, so if you go to the main webpage on the board,
Mhm.
on the USDE Board webpage,
Okay.
and you just go to the board, and then it will go to meetings, and that's where it will be.
Okay,
So
great,
there's
thank
the
you.
board docs. You can click on and get
This
all
is
that.
the Standards and Assessment Committee.
Yes.
And that's where you
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, held right next to you right now.
Oh, I
Yep,
can.
yep,
Our
have
readers.
arrived.
Okay. Yes,
Can I say something?
yes, please
Okay.
come up and tell us your name, please.
Okay, Candace Penrock, Salt Lake City School District, District Science Supervisor. I was also, I co-chaired with Ashley on our science.
Okay.
So I'd just like to speak to our process and the point that was raised that what was wrong with the standards we had. Well, it's just like cancer treatment, that what we knew 5, 10, 15 years ago has been far advanced. And so what we know about students and how they learn and about how scientists do science, there is a distinct set of practices that I can speak to both as an educator and also as a scientist, that we ask questions and we define problems and we develop models that are conceptual models. And so those are the things we want our students to be doing. We want them to be on the cutting edge of, as you could say, educational technology, meaning the way and the methods and the content that is going to help them the most. So it just came from a meeting where I'm sure you've seen videos about how much technology has changed in the last, 10, 15, 5 minutes. And we are trying to keep up with that. And I will say I instruct at a college level, I instruct pre-service teachers, I instruct in-service teachers, I work with teachers in the classroom, and they are loving the SEED standards. My elementary teachers who are in my elementary STEM endorsement cohort have really enjoyed working with three-dimensional teaching and learning. Their understanding of science has been increased tremendously because they are having to explain things, they are having to argue from evidence, and it's just transforming the way they're teaching. Their students are more engaged in the classroom. And the whole emphasis behind the SEEB standards is moving from what we have now, which is the teacher delivering instruction to the students engaging in science. And so I'm really excited about that. And I can speak to Ashley and I in our team. We worked very carefully looking at the Utah standards that we have right now. We actually kept some of them because we felt like the things that were in there were needed for our students here in Utah. We live in a really unique place with earth and space science. And so I really hope you look at the documents we thoughtfully put together on every standard, and we put why we put that standard in, how we took it from what we had, why we added something new, and I think we've been really thoughtful and we're really excited to present. So thank you very much.
Others who'd like to give us input?
Can I just ask a question follow up to that?
Yeah, follow up with your question.
I don't have that document that you're referring to. Because the standards, you don't go through each one telling us how you got there.
Ricky hasn't.
Yeah, so on the very bottom of this page,
Ricky hasn't.
there are 3 links.
Okay, so
Because
it's a link, thank you.
It is a link, because it's a spreadsheet, it would be almost impossible to print. It's pretty robust.
Jenny, would you like to?
Yeah, just a quick comment. Quick. Similar to the health standards, and this was carried on, I was at the Davis public meeting, that sometimes there's language in there that's what's considered teacher language and educator language, and it's important that that ideology is understood in the general public. So if a parent is reading it or someone's reading it, that those standards are actually understood for what they are. And so sometimes the lingo or the language, for example, word demonstrate, I'm just using the health standards because I'm more familiar with those than I am with the science. That was frequently brought up. And so if there's words that can clarify that, I think that's important. And also what was just stated here was that we need to make sure we're not leading. There's a couple of, once again, I'm referring to health standards. I should have went all the way through the science. I haven't got all the way through it yet. But making sure that it is keeping to that broad base. And sometimes I think when we're engaged in it, we don't always see all the elements. So I do agree. I'm excited for the public comment. I'm excited to hear what people are seeing, because we might be saying, as educators, oh yeah, well, it means this, partly it means this. But in reality, for a parent that's maybe not researching what's taking place in China or other areas, they have no idea that doesn't mean the same thing. And so we want to make sure that there's a cohesiveness in our education system in a way that both parents and educators are speaking the same language. And however we can do that, I just think that when you have families that can get behind the standards, you're going to have a greater success. So those are just my comments.
Yes.
I'll speak a little bit too, and sorry, it's gonna be that.
I'll clear my throat for you.
We really believe you. Gone to the base today.
This is Angela.
So, yes, Angela Stewart, and I am
Thank you.
a science teacher in Davis School District, and I was one of the leads on the biology standard. Speaking to the language thing, there is a language that educators use, but there's also a language that scientists use. And we want to make sure that children in the state of Utah understand what that science language is and what's inherent to that. And it is kind of its own set of things. And I think a lot of those terms get misinterpreted by the public, where science has this specific way of using that language, and the public doesn't always understand. And so our hopes is that in moving this forward, we can help the public come to see where science is and what the nature of science is, and helping our students also have a better understanding of the nature of science and where that leads. And I think some of the concerns come from like, well, we have to open up to all these other ideas. We do in science, and that's what the nature of science is. We're always open to ideas. And the entire purpose of science is actually to work to find a way that something doesn't fit. And if it doesn't fit, well, then it still works. And we're constantly working through that process. And the nature of science also is inherent that it has to stick with the natural world. That's what science is. And there's other aspects of knowledge that exist, and we try to help our students understand that. And it's okay to have those aspects of knowledge in your life, but science has to be within this natural realm. This is where we can stay, because that's what science is. And it's wonderful, it's amazing. And in your personal life, you can fit that in other ways of knowledge. But for science, this is what we have to do. It's what we're limited to. So helping the public understand that as well, I think, is really important.
Thank you, Angela. Terry?
Thank you. Terry Shoemaker, the Executive Director of the Utah School Superintendent's Association. And I represent the School Boards Association too here, as well as at the legislature. I just wanted to, I thought and listened carefully to this. How long have we been working on these standard revisions?
They were first approved to move forward November of 2017 to open up for standards review committee. Standards review committee approval came back in April. Standards draft started in May.
I think that's all my point's going to be. Okay, this is a long time coming. And prior to that, how often have they been reviewed?
The current standards for K-5 and 9-12 have some variability. Some were as recent as 2010, very few actually, K-2 and earth science. The rest, most recently, were adopted in 2002, but those were really just minor changes to what was available in 94, I think.
I could almost rest my case.
Yeah.
It is time for us to look to the significance of how the world has changed, how technology has changed the world, how this is influencing how kids learn, and what will be the role and influence of teachers as they integrate this with the changes in science that are being suggested here. They're going to learn one way or the other. I would like to suggest that with the correct standards, and you're trying to get to the correct standards, that's the best way for the kids to find themselves and feel their way for all of these significant changes over time. So I'm urging this group to move this process. I think our teachers need it desperately.
And I think it also speaks to Elise's idea that we have that we look in the standards at a broad way, because it's probably been way too long since we have updated these, and that we may need to look at a different way of addressing when we update standards. That's it. Yes, will you come forward?
Okay, I'm Lisa Colbert.
Thank
I
you.
am an instructional coach, and I just switched to that role. I had been teaching in a classroom up to that point in time for 14 years. And I lived, because I was a middle school teacher most recently, I have taught high school and middle school students. And I was living teaching when the 6th to 8th grade standards came out. And I had gone through other standard changes and different things throughout my years from when I taught. And this living the 6 to 8 change and the significant changes in how they were written was the first time that a change of standards truly made a change within my science classroom into what my students were becoming as a scientist instead of as a science consumer. And to me, that is one of the biggest shifts of changes, of needing a shift and finding a better need and fit for our students within our classrooms. Because so much up to this point in time has been about what our students know within science, instead of what our students can figure out, develop, use, and truly become a consumer and user of science as a practice itself. And the difference that these version of standards have made with my students was gigantic. When you walked into my classroom, it was a different classroom. As I see teachers, as I work with them now as a teacher of teachers, and as I see teachers make these same changes in their classrooms, it's phenomenal, the difference of a student that these standards have the ability to create, and the excitement of my high school teachers that I talk with them to be able to have those type of standards in their hands. They're just waiting. They want to see what is coming for them. And that's what I have to say about that.
Thank you very much. Okay. Others who would like to, Elisa, you want to make comments?
No, one of my concerns of the way we're writing standards now, and it's not just science, it's all over the places, we're putting teaching methodology in the standards, and that's why the teachers like them, but because I heard it with math, I heard it with English, I've heard it all over across the board, that embedding these methodologies into the standards like reignites this passion for teaching in a lot of people, and you hear things like it changes your classroom. I just don't think that that's the only avenue to get there. And I have concerns, and I'm going to step outside of science and get to math with embedding the methodology into the standard, because then it creates other problems where teachers are somewhat linear in thinking because we've now identified how they're supposed to teach to some degree, and sometimes it's great, but other times someone may have a different idea. And so I have concerns about it, and I think we could take both paths at the same time without always embedding that methodology into the standards, that it could be supporting documentation, other things. Anyways, that's one of my biggest concerns.
Answer that for science.
Yeah.
Again, okay, sorry. So it's not so much that what's in the science standards we're teaching methods for teachers. What they found is that these are actual practices that scientists do. So it became this whole other aspect of like, this is what the kids need to know, because they need to know how to be a scientist. Not just what scientists know, but how to be a scientist. And so those are the methodologies, I think, that sometimes are getting a little bit confused. We're not trying to tell the teachers what to do. Right. We're trying to tell them you do need to teach them what scientists do. That's at least one place we're trying to go with it.
Sorry, can I just follow up to that?
All right.
I appreciate that. And I don't have a specific standard in front of me right now. I just remember with the 6-8 standards that sometimes that was a transfer to similar to that bio 4.1 that she and I read completely differently. Now I'm mimicking whoever's voice that was. Was that you? Because now your voice sounds better now than mine now. It like transferred onto me, but that sometimes they end up kind of leading, and then we test on that, so then it further leads us to a particular conclusion. When we say, so it's the same thing with verbiage that we're talking about with this demonstrate or analyze to show, and then we're saying to show that global warming or to show whatever it is, instead of this give and take of the for and against side of whatever it is, so that kids can explore all possibilities. I mean, is the center of the earth, has anyone ever actually reached the center of the earth? Like, we have evidence or lines of thinking that show this line of thought, but what if, just so that kids are always constantly in this exploration mode of not ever thinking anything's completely solved, because the world advances so quick. And just like Vince talked about, that we were moving into the ice age, and then there was the acid rain period. Like, if you just go back decade after decade, there were all these different pools of thought that permeated society, and everyone thought that we were heading these certain paths. And then we move forward 10 years and it's like, oh, well, now we're heading here. And it just seems like if we can create an environment where every possibility is always open, that it creates scientists, because we're not leading them towards certain conclusions. And that's one of my biggest concerns, is the way they're written sometimes is leading to a certain
comment
conclusion.
I'd like to address, but give you an opportunity. Tell us your name.
My name is Melissa Mendenhall, and I'm the elementary science specialist for Alpine School District. And I just kind of wanted to address this idea that these new standards are telling teachers how they have to teach, because I think we have to be careful. That's a misunderstanding, I think. Telling teachers how to teach would say you have to use lecture, or you have to use direct instruction, or you have to use this one certain curriculum. But that's not what this is saying. What these standards are saying is we're looking at research from all the past, plus new research in a meta-analysis saying these are the ways students learn best. And that science has a way of thinking. They think in certain ways. So there's these 3 dimensions of how the discipline of science works. Scientists think through certain ways. They do certain things, and they know certain things. And in the past, our standards have been really shifted to just what they know, leaving out the fact that they think in certain ways and do work in certain ways. An example might be in the past 6th grade standards, before we adopted the new seed standards, for moon phases, we had students memorize, this is a waxing crescent, this is a waning crescent, it happens every so many days, and that's what they knew. But what did that were they really thinking or doing like scientists really think and do, and what our students need to be critical consumers and be able to go on to college and career fields if they so choose. So now the new seed standards have kind of that same idea, but what they do is look at these standards are put in that they model to understand patterns and systems. So scientists think through systems. They use models to show what they're doing. And through that, they can say, oh, because I know the position of the sun, earth, and moon at these different times, I'm going to observe this pattern in the sky. Now I can attach a name to that. That's a full moon. But this is what it really means. This is the system that's happening. And, these are the patterns that we're seeing. That's a much deeper way of thinking. And that's really what our students need to prepare them for their future. They can go and Google the phases of the moon. So that's just memorize and regurgitate. But getting them to really think critically is what we need. And understanding these concepts and ways of thinking. And kind of to address what's been talked about with scientists have their own language. Of course they do. Every discipline does. I spent the first 22 years of my life in ballet. I can talk to someone for 30 seconds and I can know, do you really know what's going on or are you faking it? I know. And so, but when I retired from teaching ballet, I taught adjunct at Utah Valley University. I loved teaching, so I wanted to continue. And I saw, every discipline has their own way of communicating. And that's what is in research right now for literacy. That's a big deal. It's called disciplinary literacy. And it's important for people to understand that, yes, to be able to engage and become members of that community, you've got to understand how they think and how they work, how they read, write, speak, and listen. That's important. And how they do that in science is different than math, is different than social studies. Doesn't mean one's right or wrong, but you can tell if someone has that foundation. And what we don't want to do is disadvantage our students by not allowing them to be able to engage in that, which means that as parents and even as teachers, we're going to have to kind of step it up and start looking at how do scientists communicate? How do mathematicians communicate? We want to move forward. We can't rely on the past. We got to help them move forward to prepare them for their futures.
And I think what I like about the standards here is I think they combat what you're worried about. I mean, I know we interpret it a little differently, but to me, like I've seen students, I teach language arts, but my students talk about these and they incorporate them literacy-wise into my class. And I've watched the change from memorizing the phases of the moon to actually asking questions, looking for patterns. And to me, I think one of the reasons I read that standard in the Bio 4 differently is because when you identify patterns, that becomes open. That is self-correcting. That's what scientists do. What I might know today might change tomorrow. And I think these standards say you ask questions, you develop, you plan, you analyze. To me, that's the antithesis of memorization. Nobody's going to tell you what's at the center of the earth because you're going to discover it. And you're going to look at theories and you're going to disagree and you're going to analyze. And I think it's just interesting how people see it differently because to me, it does. I agree with you. I don't want anybody telling students, this is right, this is wrong. I want them to say, why is this right? Why is this wrong? And is there a chance could be wrong or could be right? Like I want that exploration. And I think we want that in all subjects. It's changing because we want our kids to not just be consumers. We want them to be the scientists, be the writers. So I agree with you, but I see this as doing your goal. And I
think that if we're concerned about a vocabulary, what does obtaining, evaluating, communicating information mean? This is free online.
Yeah.
The research is right there and it explains it all out. Go to a framework for K-12 science education. Look at it.
That's good.
And read it. It explains all of that. It talks about this nature of science and how scientists think and communicate.
And we want to use that language.
If I can, one thing that document adds really specific is, again, the purpose standards are goals. They are the goals we have for kids and student learning. So in the past, we had two sets of goals for our students in our past standards. The ILOs, the intended learning outcomes, which were pretty much almost the equivalent of what we have here as the science and engineering practices. Those were goals. Then we had content standards that were goals. Now, what that research specifically is, there's a chapter specific to the importance of integrating those goals, each of the practices, the cross-cutting concepts, and the
I love
content
that.
into a single standard, because history shows that when the standards, no matter how much professional development we do, if the standards separate what you do from the content you learn, teachers will only teach content, or are more likely to only teach content. And so that's the shift, adding them to them. And again, it doesn't say how to build a model. We see teachers all over the state building models in so many different amazing ways that they've been sharing with one another. Here's how I did it. Here's how we did it. Here's how my kids decided to do it. I mean, we're giving kids the tool of, we now want you as a student to find a way to model this thinking of phases of the moon. So that is the shift. These are the goals we have for kids learning, and that's why they're listed that way.
Thank you. All right, well, is there anyone else who wanted to give us input on the science standards?
Well, maybe all these people came in for this topic.
Okay, we're taking input on the science standards. Public comments. Is there anyone else who hasn't had a chance to speak that would like to give us?
I just would like to add one small thing.
Okay.
My name is Wendy Lawrence, and I would like to introduce the idea of conceptual understanding. I hear the discussion going back and forth a lot of a way of teaching or knowing something. But in science, in social studies, in art, whatever it is, what we're learning to do is develop how we understand a concept, how we build it, how we hold it, and how we add to it. Whatever our field, if your field is different than mine, we can share those concepts and go back and forth and add to them. I've taught for an awful long time, and I think the greatest gift of that is watching my students go so far beyond what I know. And they come back and say, look what I discovered. Whether it was a kindergartner with a great question, or a PhD in genetics coming back and saying, we now know more about hindbrain patterning. Whatever these are, it's about coming to know. And the concept of conceptual understanding is what we're trying to get at. Not that we're telling anyone one way of being, but rather, how can we all come to know together, develop these concepts and communicate them so that we have a better world. And I think that's what it kind of gets at. When we all wish for these things for our children, we wish that there's no dream deferred, no potential unrealized, and each one can be a hero in their own way. So I think that's the beauty in what came into writing these standards, is it's helping the children develop conceptual understanding and communicate across multiple ways of knowing.
Thank you. Last call, anyone else?
I'm late to the party, missed part of it, but I was in another committee meeting. And I'm a teacher by training as well as a lawyer. And so but I was saying this is a but question, or but statement. I cannot look at every single verb that you use in here and second guess you. I must trust that the writers of science standards, who are also scientists and science teachers, are choosing the best words and verbs that are helpful for students and will get to the end that we want to get to. And so I am most persuaded by Mr. Shoemaker's comments that I know how hard it is to be the teacher, anticipating new standards, knowing that we will be making some course corrections, but never quite getting them in front of us. And I really think we need to move to that point, and to the extent we have to provide public input, because I think I do agree with Elisa that we are the policymakers, but I cannot pick apart the words because I have to trust you. And then I would have to find every word in all of these documents, make sure that verb is changed. And I just don't think that is my role. I think it's my role to trust your experience in the field, in the recent classroom, and then go with that. So I would like to move forward with these, and if that requires a motion, is that what you're looking for?
It's a motion to approve the release of K-5 and 912 science education standards for a 90-day public
comment period. And that is what I move, to release those standards for a 90-day public comment period. And we'll gather still more information from still more individuals who are both, who are maybe a combination of parents and educators and policymakers. But I think we need to move forward. I am appalled. Some of you were not born in 1992, I am sure. And that our standards are that old really does not speak well of us.
And if I could just really quickly,
Go ahead.
one thing that we were able to do with a 90-day review for the 6-8 standard is it hit a lot of these things that were touched, right? Parents were able to say, I don't get this, this isn't clear, we added clarity. Teachers said, this doesn't make sense, how does this look in my classroom? We added clarity. Specialists from the field were able to say, this isn't clear enough, or maybe this is a misconception that's very common, how do we fix that? I mean, it's a great opportunity. We realize that what we have is a draft, and we're really excited to see it.
Gotta start moving forward. And I feel like this is a scientific concept of stasis, I think. Am I wrong?
It's static. No, just kidding.
Oh.
Let us place Carol's motion. So all in favor of approving the release of K-5 and 9-12 science education standards for 90-day public review,
Janet,
say
are we
aye.
gonna be able
For
to speak to the motion?
Pardon me?
Were we gonna have a discussion about the motion?
Oh, excuse me. There, you've heard the motion. Now I will ask for discussion.
Thank you. I'm struggling because I'm gonna vote a way I don't wanna vote, and I'm gonna explain why. I am not, we've gone through this, and I'm not gonna rehash all of the little critiques that I have. In general philosophy, I am opposed to the nationalization of education, which is happening across the board in all subject content matter. We have national standards for every single content area. And philosophically, that goes against every belief I have. Knowing that this is going to pass, I'm going to vote for the release for public comment because it's been misinterpreted that I somehow am trying to hide things from the public. But I just want to state it clear that I philosophically completely disagree with the move that we're heading, not just in science, but every single subject matter, because every single subject across the board, and even the health standards, are very embedded with national standards. And so philosophically, I'm opposed, but I'm going to vote for the release because I don't want people to think I'm hiding something from the public, knowing that it will pass. And so that's why I just want to explain that, because I am absolutely, this is not the direction I believe we should be heading as a country.
All right. So then any further discussion? All those in favor of the release say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Thank you, Ricky, and thank you to all you folks who gave your time and talents and shared input with us. We appreciate that. Okay. I'm not done.
It was close. I know, but when we move things around, and I'm like,
sweet. I just I knew there were a lot of
That was Monday or Wednesday? Oh, yeah. Monday, Wednesday, probably.
oh no, I'm not. I get paid up in this. So it doesn't matter. You don't get news articles, you don't get it. I do. And Kate takes it.
Yeah.
Well, she's got a few.
All right, that brings us to our item 3.3, which is a rule on electronic devices in public schools. We are looking at draft 2. I have an amendment that's been sent to me, and I think Carol has some concerns about this rule as well. So, Carol, do you want to express?
Sure.
your thoughts?
I confessed to reading this again at 11:30 last night. But I think we just have some more work to do. I think I was the one that brought this back from near death and felt like we still needed this rule. But I think that if we're going to continue to want this rule, we need to get it right. And so in reading it, there were some connection, transition issues that are more grammatical than not, but I think that it still needs some work. So I would like to delay it for one more month. And there were more than just phrases that we could add in amendments. So I'd like to delay it for one more month. Plus, then Janet pointed out to me that Linda Hansen had offered an amendment that came from
A legislator.
a legislator that I would like to consider if it's something I would like to add as a committee member, or if it's something I would like
Is that
to.
not in here?
No.
No, that's just,
I
She
heard
just
about
got-
that too.
She just got it yesterday.
Yeah.
So I would like to delay this for one more month to be able to work with Jeff and work with Sarah, work with whoever else we have to have it read well as have appropriate components in it. There's no point in hashing out all of those editing changes in this committee. If there were 5, I would say yes, but there are more than that. So I would like to table this, delay it, whatever the
Okay,
word is, for one more month.
so, do you want to make a motion to?
That is a motion.
To delay this for a month and bring it back? So Carol is making that motion to delay. I'm checking with staff. Is there any time sensitive thing with this? We're okay to.
It was almost dead anyway. So now I've revived it and really questioning my judgment at this point. But I think we need to do it right and do it well.
Well, since you were the one that
I know.
initially.
And their death
And there's no
experience.
rush, we continued it.
Yeah, it's continued, and the rule that's in place is not that bad, but it is worthy of updating. So I really think we should just get it cleaned up and do it right. And this is extra complicated because there'll probably be a new committee to review it next month. But then so many more people can feel my pain. So
Okay, so then we have a motion from Carol to table R277-495 to be continued on our agenda for next month. Any discussion? Then I will make sure that the amendment from.
and to consider, I want to make sure we consider Linda Hansen's
And consider
wherever.
Linda Hansen's amendment as well. Would you like me to tell you, staff, just what that amendment was?
That would be great.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's starting on line 14, and she wants to rewrite that to say pursuant to section 76-10-1231, a policy that the LEA shall provide annual notice to all parents in the LEA of the location of information collected by the Division of Consumer Protection regarding a residential internet service provider's ability to block inappropriate matter or other material harmful to minors on home networks as requested by a parent. So I think her idea is she wants parents to be informed about how they can block inappropriate sites on their home internet service.
And
Does that make
that's
sense?
added actually in this draft.
It's in the draft.
There is something to that effect.
Oh, okay, there, I was
On line
looking at it, there is, did you get this before I did?
Yes, this
Oh.
actually, I don't know if any of you recall when Linda emailed the board a while back saying that her and Laura had met with Senator Weiler regarding some provisions he wanted to add. This is what I was told.
And
Okay.
And my request would be that we look at that. That seems like an not understandable
Yeah.
run
for some
on
reason
sentence.
I thought, no, but she told me, and it's a little hard to.
So let's actually put it in language that is user friendly if we want this to be for information that parents can then receive and use. Let's see if we can write it a little more
Okay, so
succinctly and
that's not a surprise to you folks. Okay. So
And I have a modicum of reservations about, is it the board's responsibility to tell parents how to filter information on their own home system and devices? I question that. So I'd like to explore that, but I certainly doesn't need to be so grammatically
That's gonna make people like up in arms. if you
awkward and
don't
long.
know how to do
What,
things.
yeah, so I think we need to consider that.
People's opinions about what's appropriate is so different.
Uh-huh. So I have some reservations philosophically, but I don't have any reservations grammatically. Bad.
All right, well, then, let's place the motion to table. Any further discussion? All those in favor of tabling till next month, say aye.
Aye.
Okay, thank you. That brings us to, item 3.5, board policy 5009. Codifying the existence of the School Safety Advisory Committee. And Christy and Jeff,
Yes.
do you want to present this for us?
Sure, I can go ahead and get started with, what you have before you is, a fairly simple policy, just codifying what has already been going on. As most of you recall, Senator Milner, probably back in August, maybe September, requested that several groups, including USBE, get together to discuss the issue of school safety. There were several groups going in their own directions. She wanted everyone to get on one page. So in order to accomplish her request, which we reported back to the legislature in October, we formed the School Safety Advisory Committee that took in all of these entities and formed, actually made a huge list, Patty can speak to as well, about all the potential different constituencies and trying to distill down a workable sized group that could represent all those constituencies. We met, that has resulted in a draft bill from Representative Ward, which you may be familiar with or heard about. And in moving forward, it was discussed that we wanted to formally codify this committee and continue moving forward as Representative Ward's bill is not the destination, obviously. This is still a journey that we're on. There's always new issues with school safety. And so you now have before you the policy as a result. Let Christy speak to any other detail.
No, absolutely. So this group is meant to address current issues, look at data, and work collaboratively for state language and state policies that can also be applied and modified at the local level. And so this is meant to be best practices as far as everyone not duplicating efforts, but coordinating efforts, maximizing what we can do in terms of school safety.
So this will, I think Mike Kennedy, the former representative, started an effort. This would not do away with, but this would substitute for that. And then there was some other committee that was, I think Representative Elison, maybe, I don't know, was involved. So this is just bringing all of those committees into one place, is that right?
So to provide further clarification on the makeup of the committee, all of those entities, which was UHSAA, the governor's committee, we had the schools, the wards committee, Kennedy's committee, and then USBE. So then everyone is represented around the table, and I think 20 people around the table, is that about right?
Said 16 members.
16, well, then we have,
Oh.
yeah, and then we have, USBE staff as well.
Oh.
So within that committee, then each one of those then represents, let's say that if it was the law enforcement committee, then they also have a table. So the law enforcement committee should go and they have a table with UHP, Salt Lake, so they have a table that they represent of community stakeholders that they bring that information back. So the committee could be up to like 100 members if we counted everyone around the subtables. And so really finding a way to have that voice heard at the larger.
I get, thank you, that's helpful clarification. I totally agree that there were just so many, it was the flavor of the month, and I'm glad that it's been consolidated. Good, thanks.
Okay, Lisa?
So I'm looking at the voting members. And these, who initially decided that these are the people on there? Because I'm concerned that we have a lot of representation from organizations, but the general populace, none at all, or no student representatives. So one suggestion I would have, the bigger meeting is never a good idea, but I don't know who to cut, but we have this student advisory council that we've just created. And then just I am concerned about the lack of parent representation on here. And also, I guess the School Boards Association, but I don't even see any teacher representation on here. And the entities that have to deal very closely with student safety is, I mean, what does a teacher do in the classroom? They know maybe they don't want another thing, but in practice, everyone's having to practice. Parents have a huge interest in what practices are being put into place. And I hate to add more people, but I'm really concerned that there's no representation of those.
So I'd like to address
Okay,
that.
well,
So-
those three, student,
Yeah.
parent, teacher.
Yes, absolutely. And it is part of the model for this group. Each of the members, as Patty explained, has their own subgroups that they go back and receive feedback from as far as what's being dealt with within that committee. And I know on my committee, I have a representative from PTA. who's the parent
What's
voice.
yours?
Oh, so mine is the education work group. So, and I'm part of this committee. And so it's one of the constituents that I go back to and receive feedback from.
Would you like to see the subgroups? that
Well,
are
because
attached
I'm,
to this?
yeah,
just looking for
I'm looking
where
at the
would
list of the
be-
16 council members and where they come from. How do I know what their subgroup is?
What is
So that's-
your
would you like
designation on
the
this
Yes.
list?
So I'm under one, which is 2 representatives from the Utah State Board of Education.
I thought those would be board members.
Well, there were two
We
board
do have,
members.
we do have 2 board
And
members.
they're gonna go, both of them are going away. And can I just put in a plug for myself? To be on this committee, because don't do that. So, yeah, there are 2 board members, but
I
your
was
staff.
thinking the same
I am staff, yes. Yes, staff.
Yeah,
Okay.
the board members were Carolyn.
So Linda's.
Oh, Linda's, I thought Kathleen was.
And these 16 members that are on here were before the board when we talked
Right.
about the committee. And that's what, so we had this approved. And at that time, we showed the subgroups, but we can add that to this documentation.
Yeah,
so
sorry,
that
'cause
everyone
I
can
don't
see.
know,
Yeah.
I don't remember that conversation.
And so, and that was when we came to the board prior to going to the interim committee so that
Yeah.
everyone knew what was happening and then prior to actually having the first committee meeting.
I do.
So, but we can get that to you as well. But I think, board member Ellis, I think that what you're speaking to is at what level, so should they be a subgroup or should they be a primary voting member? So that's a different conversation. And so, with that, if you would like for us to reconsider, my question is, do we need to bring it back to the board to say, who else should be on there since this was kind of already approved, or do we just decide that here and then go
Well,
forward?
Is there a rush?
No.
Because
No.
maybe, I mean, if you've already presented the subgroups, I can go back and find it, but I'm just wondering if we look at it again next month. Because maybe we feel like the representation is there that way.
No, we can do whatever you guys want.
When is the next committee meeting? That might be the only rush.
December 12th is the next, but we've been.
But they already have.
And it's not dependent on this document
Yeah.
at all.
So it could possibly, the next committee meeting, there could be somewhat adjusted membership. Is that what we're thinking?
Yeah. So, yeah, this just codifies what's happening.
Whatever you guys would like to have.
Let's see.
So are you ready for public input?
Yes,
Or do you
Sarah.
still have more
Give
to
us your
do?
input.
I just realized how comfortable this committee is.
Thanks, come right here in the corner.
Oh my gosh.
Nice and close. I appreciate the conversation about inclusion of who's on the committee, because I had a conversation with Jeffrey about that the other day. There is not currently, unless this is considered the access committee, anybody representing employees in the building. Kind of that first line of who interacts with students daily, a bus driver, paraprofessional,
Right.
social
Yeah, I think
worker,
it was
a teacher, principal. I mean, those are critical people who are
the
interacting with
association,
students
school
daily.
boards,
Right.
charter boards, school boards.
And so I think you really can enhance representation and get a totally different perspective. So then that kind of brings the question of, would you want to appoint an individual teacher or someone that represents the constituency? Because I've heard the constituency word used a lot. And so we'd advocate for groups that can represent a constituency, meaning that, UEA could go back and gather input from thousands of members versus an individual teacher maybe having a harder time gathering that in. So kind of consider that as you're thinking about the constituency groups. And I'd also just put out the Ray Ward bill that was presented at interim in November actually mentions a lot about school employees.
on these threat assessment teams. And I'm meeting with Representative Ward coming up this week, but there are issues about current district policy that exists for school employees. So anytime you're now talking about safety with students, that's one issue, and safety with school employees, that's another issue. So I would encourage you to broaden the constituency, think very carefully about how you get the most input that you need on this in ways, if you're going to be setting policy, that you're really getting input that you need. So I would hope that you come back with a broader constituency.
I think that's very good. Thanks, Sue.
You brought up entities that I hadn't considered, but having, probably they all have an association. I know there's associations for everything, but realistically getting all of those associations a seat at the table. So I'm just wondering if we create, do we have any say over the subgroups? Probably not. They were their own entities. Because if we took some of these subgroups and combined efforts, so school personnel, so
There's
that
employees, there is.
Personnel that aren't teachers.
There's
Right.
a classified employees.
right, like the
association.
secretaries are often kind of the first, right at the door, and that's like one of the, if you have an incident, that's
Just
that's
gonna
a
be
scary
there.
place to be.
So there's a, it's like a parent-teacher association, maybe that would be the best place to find a parent, or the school employees association, which are the non-licensed employees, or the teachers association, which are the principals association, would have reach to those broader constituencies where they're having regular meetings.
Sure.
Well, and as I looked at this, and you make a good point about this, and I hadn't really thought of it, but there's not one person on here, and I hesitate to say that absolutely, but who would be in a school every day and say, wait, that just doesn't work. You know, that, let me tell you how this really happens. And sometimes often in UEA, you do have a person who has been a teacher and is now a UEA representative. And you do have that same thing with the Principals Association that you have. And the Public Employees Association it has as its chair or president, I can't remember what he's called, a person who's actually been a certified, classified employee in a school. So I think it would be helpful to add to this group, and I had shared my same concerns. I mean, a 15-member school board is not ideal, but that we add a few people who actually are in schools or have recently been in schools on a daily basis.
Or who communicate with.
Yes, and
Well,
brought
I
close
think there was an organization for classified employees.
There is the
Yes.
Utah School
Employees
Employees
Association.
Association.
Okay. Thank you.
I have a
Jenny,
quick-
did you have a?
No, I was just gonna say, like, for UA, for example, the people at the UA office might not be in the classroom, those very few, but, teachers are communicating to them. And so, and we're attending meetings and we're talking there, so that's one
most
way to
of
get
them-
broad outreach.
And most of them have been recently.
Well, right, exactly,
That's
but
true.
even if they're not, they're
Yeah.
getting input from those of us in the
On
classroom
a
every day.
daily basis.
And probably the ideal is to have the current classroom teacher and someone that has a constituency.
Yeah.
A parent and someone who has a constituency.
Right.
So you kind of get both, but then you're talking really big numbers. So
And you're talking about getting somebody out of the classroom, which is really hard.
Yeah,
right. So those are the kind of things you have to weigh.
but I
in.
definitely agree. We need more.
Yeah.
I need more worker bees on this. These are all
Yeah.
the queen bees.
Like when you said bus
I
driver,
wanna
it
be-
just-
I was like, oh my gosh, where are the bus
School
drivers?
safety.
The secretary is huge.
Yes.
Did you have?
Yeah, so I'm just trying to think, I want as much perspective as possible. And so, like, looking at the PTA, I'd also like to include PTOs or someone that's not a member of that, and the UEA, you hold representation from a lot of teachers, but there's other teachers that aren't in UEA. I don't know of any other organization, but if we could have a broader subgroup that isn't only associations, but people that have a different perspective. I mean, just look at the teachers on our board, Scott versus whatever. There's different perspectives and situations that we have.
Which is why I just think that issue of trying to get back to constituencies, so
Yeah.
they're representing more than themselves.
Yeah.
But I
More
also,
than a building's.
I don't want to.
Not in here. I'm thinking of the subgroup.
Yes, I agree. And that's just, I don't want to expand this
Right.
beyond what's reasonable.
I'm gonna let, Linda, you wanted to say something, then I'm gonna turn to Patty.
Well, thank you. I think that, remember how this task force came about? It was, coming off of a really emotional
Yeah.
experience, right? So we all want to have, I mean, we all want to do something for school safety. And if we're not doing anything that, so we all want to do something. But I think that I just feel like somewhere along the line, we're losing touch with what's already being done. So let's just take my small district, okay,
That's
that
a
I'm
very good
involved in Juab, and we have 5 schools. So that's a pretty small area. All 5 of our schools are so drastically different. So as a board member, where am I getting my information from as far as what is considered safe, or what do we need to do in our safe schools? And that's coming from our PTOs, our school community councils, our teachers, and it's coming from grassroots on up. And then we look at our practice policy district-wide and maybe need to change our policy, or maybe need to reallocate funding to certain priorities. Does that make sense? So, and it's sometimes kind of a small, if you ask one school in particular that I'm thinking of 10 years ago, if we could lock all of the school doors across, around that building, they would have said, no, we like to come in. And then there were incidents that happened, and then we said, okay, we're gonna lock all of the doors and have a central entry at this particular elementary school. The other 2 elementary schools, don't you do that to us. That's fine if they do it. And that's just within our district, okay? Now, that school 2 years ago went to everything's locked and there's a buzz in. After that was done, the community said, oh, we like that. Can we do it now at our other schools? Does that make sense? So what I'm trying to say is, it's just so local. And I just want to tell you that as board members, we are doing everything that we possibly can, allocating resources that we have available. But it's so, and I'm sure this committee, I know, I've talked with them, it's complicated because there's one-time monies as far as infrastructure, but there's ongoing monies as far as social workers, psychologists, teachers, training to our teachers. And I think sometimes we're not recognizing it. We want to look at it from out here, but a rule that's made up here, and we say, well, we want PTA representative, UEA, and I don't disagree with that. But a PTA member in Davis School District has no idea what that PTA is doing in Juab or Iron. I mean, I live in Juab, I'm on the board, I teach in Nebo. Those 2 districts are drastically different in how they approach school safety and, and none of it's wrong and all of it's great. And are we doing everything that we have possible? Can we do more? Absolutely. We just need some support, and sometimes it feels like everything's being done to us. And we're not being utilizing all of our resources. But I thank you for because we can't do it alone. I mean, if there is a tragedy in one of our schools, we all feel it, and we have these tragedies in safety all the time. We don't hear about them in the media all the time. Does that make sense? Yeah. Until there's something more global.
There's a lot of prevention that happens that we don't hear
Yes,
about.
there's so much prevention, and but some of that, like teacher training, something we did it started very like on a community basis. Teachers were there as well as me, and they said, hey, Linda, as a board member, can we get this training to do that? That came from our teachers. Did that training, and our teachers have thanked us ever since. Now, did that hit the media? No. But we're doing things all the time. And so anyway, I thank the committee for what they're doing, but with that, just remember, I mean, kind of maybe think bottom up and top down and where that kind of comes together.
I asked Christy if she would put up the subgroups that are up there. And so, we can't really see that.
No.
I can't see that. That was nice. So thanks for that, Christy.
Is there something on the
board?
Okay, but with that, I mean, I don't think that, I'm not sure what you guys would like, or staff to be doing right now, but maybe we can look at this further. The one thing that I wanted to bring in is that, when we combined all of these individual committees that Senator Milner asked us to do, she put it as USBE's responsibility to convene this group together. When we convened the group together initially, the heads of those groups that were reporting out individually said, here who are the stakeholders. At one time or at several times throughout the discussion,
they said, whose responsibility is school safety? And at some point, some people will disagree that it's USBE's responsibility to even be in the business of school safety. And they might say that it's Department of Public Safety. They might say that it's DeSalma. They might say that it's, and so a major part of the discussion is being able to rely on the committee to balance that. And for example, there's different standard response protocols. Davis School District has, I think, 14 or 16 municipalities alone in one district with different standard response protocols. And the law enforcement agencies were saying we have this response time that is actually elongated just because we don't have standard procedures, and we feel it's our responsibility, not with education, because we are the people responding to them, because they're talking about natural disasters, they're talking about disease, they're talking about all kinds of things, whether there's UHP said maybe it's hours because there could be a chemical spill on the freeway which could impact it. So with all of these entities in a room, we're not talking just about if there's a school shooter or if there is something like that, that's this traumatic event. We're also talking about events that are happening in the community that might impact the school, whether there's there needs to be a lockdown because there's a gun in someone's home that might impact the flow pattern of kids leaving school. So with all of that being heard, that's why these entities were chosen. And there was a lot of discussion about who should be on here, but so I wanted to open it up to be able to say, we can revisit this list and then be able to look at the subgroups and say, do we need to add to the subgroups, or do we need to exchange positions and say, this shouldn't be the subgroup, that should actually be the main person on this? And so what I'm asking right now is, should this discussion happen in here? Would you like a discussion outside here to be able to just look at all of this for a month and get together and then come back together and say, we've looked at all the members in the subgroups and the main voting member, and then be able to say, what that looks like? How would you like for staff to be able to accommodate that discussion? Because I think that discussion is open, and that this is what occurred in a short space of time to be able to get to legislative and fiscal requests for ed interim. And so that was done, and then to be able to codify this, that's one thing the group said is, this is so important for all of these entities that you see here to gather around the same table and have the same language. And so but whether they're a voting member or a subgroup member, I think that since it was rested with us. So what direction would you like for us to be able to come back?
And I have a couple of thoughts on this. Let me just say to Linda first, that my whole idea of this committee would not be to give more duties to local boards of education. It would be, here are some additional state resources, but also state ideas that if you are open-minded, you would look at. That was been because I've heard this a number of times. I kind of don't know, and I'm not being critical at all. I'm not quite sure if when I hear this, it's you're saying you're not appreciating our efforts, or we're taking care of it ourselves. Thank you. And from my perspective, I feel like I appreciate both. I just want to add to your opportunities, your tools, your funding, if we can, to say great. But it's interesting. I have to tell one story. I just heard day before yesterday, despite all of this and all these lockdown patterns, which I personally am not a fan of, about a parent, a very angry parent who was mad about a student who they'd gotten in an accident in the school parking lot. It's the parent's fault, actually, but he found his way into that student's classroom where he confronted the student. So despite all of our talk and all of our, our good intentions, and I hope that the local boards can hear this and say, golly, we can still do better. And that's why I want to say it to Linda. But I would like, in response to Patty, I would like us to revisit as a board who's on this committee. And yes, it's going to be a larger group maybe, but I think Elisa had some good ideas. I think we also have to be realistic about constituencies, even though we'd like a real life teacher and a representative of a teacher association, a real life janitor, or a representative of the Classified Employees Association. I think we've got to be realistic. I think my druthers would be, and tell me if this is completely out of line, that you have a meeting with your staff people and revisit it with you communicating what this committee has said, and
take it to the December 12th meeting.
Yes, and then I I would wish that maybe this is completely impossible. I wish board members could be invited to hear that discussion with staff members. I mean, maybe maybe that's inappropriate. I would defer to you, but I would like to hear that discussion and hear how it goes. But I want to leave it to you to do that, kind of reworking.
Right, and one other thought. Sure. Sorry. My other thought, in addition to just who's on the group, and the reason why it's important to get the right people on the group is because the work of the committee is pretty substantial as it currently reads. So it says that this is on the second page under staff or under meetings, pardon me. The meetings are not subject to the Open and Public Meeting Act.
Right.
Oh.
I saw that.
So, okay, so if it's not something that, I could sit in and kind of hear the policy discussion, then a policy comes out and I'm caught off guard about, wait a minute, that's not a policy that's really going to work. So that's a concern. And then just above that, it says that the committee or the meetings are going to make written recommendations and provide feedback to potential legislative actions, including bill requests and fiscal requests. So even though that would go through your committee process, I'm guessing at some point, again, if there's work you can do on the front about what really is workable on legislative action, you need to have all the constituencies in the room, because those are some pretty heady things that are going to be happening if you're talking about solutions and policy actions.
Why is this a closed meeting?
Yeah,
Well, I can see
Is it
some
because
reason
security
that-
devices?
Because of all the security that's talked about specifically within schools and which schools have what, and then what the measures are that they're working together collaboratively.
That's what I was
Yeah,
guessing.
so there's safety concerns with.
I guess
So I can see that, and then when
But then that doesn't.
recommendations come out,
Right.
suddenly, you're
We
kind
said
of
this
further
is not
down the
even
road.
workable. I mean,
Yeah,
that's what I
so-
worry about, that real life teachers say this is not even workable. So I worry about that. I had another thought that I meant to say previously, and then Lisa's patiently raising her hand. I think this should be a rule and not a policy. I think this should be a rule, not a policy. I think it should be something that is, that has the force of law. This is what this committee will do and how it will do it. And because a policy is just an internal organizational document, not a fan of them anyway, but I think this has such significance. It should be a rule. So it wouldn't make you redo all this work. I just think it would have the effect of being the force of law.
Would you like for us to?
So, well, I don't.
I
don't know.
maybe
This
maybe
came
other people
about
don't agree.
as some legislation. Was there any thought? And you've worked with these different representatives on it. Was there any thought to making it rule, or
were they not thinking about that distinction?
They were actually looking at it to be codified. And
Oh,
There were some concerns in terms of the board making it a rule, because there are so many outside entities we don't control. So we can't really compel them. We could compel ourselves to seek them out in membership and joining us, definitely, but we couldn't necessarily compel them to be a
the
part of that.
structure which we have been asked to provide is under the authority of the board. So the structure of the committee and the meeting, so it's not really I'm not looking to, I don't know how to say this exactly. The reason I like it into a rule is it makes the structure then into a rule under the board, which I actually prefer. It is.
You mean Stasis?
Yeah.
That wasn't me. That wasn't me yesterday, by the way.
I think it was our audio.
What is
You
it?
guys were both muted, and so I think.
And I wasn't on because I was in a.
Come on.
Anyway, I think the structure itself should be, no, I don't feel. I think the structure should be, and you're right, you're fair, that's fair. I'm sorry, shut up, Carol.
Well, it's been a long time since you
It
spoke,
has.
and I want.
Oh.
This is what happened to me yesterday.
has our access committee and rule?
There's some stuff.
I know that they're invited. I remember.
Let Lisa speak, can it? Just because I was the butt in.
Let her
this.
speak.
So I have been leery of these advisory councils on the safety issue for the very reasons that were mentioned. Because I absolutely am opposed to anything we do that pushes down to the local entities in this scenario more than anything else, because they look so different. If we mandate something across the state and we've got such, such diversity in our districts and the makeup of, I just can't get behind that. And so that is absolutely something that I have been closely watching to make sure that that happens. And so this, I'd like to make sure that the goal, so we have a lot of how it's funded, how the makeup is, where they hold meetings, but the purpose of it, well, then you have the purpose right here, and the duties, but maybe we could suggest, especially if it is codified, that it's not necessarily mandates heading down, but the idea is to produce ideas.
Yes.
To create a safe environment, but not necessarily an imposition upon.
And no, that's what I'm.
But I'm wondering if we're asked to make recommendations, which it sounds like this is why this was brought to us before we seek legislation to put it into law, because it sounds like that's what the entity is going to do is.
What legislation created this? I don't think we have that.
I thought you said that they want to codify this.
But that has been discussed, maybe whether it should be codified or whether it should be rule or where it should lie. And so, I mean, and Terry Shoemaker's here and he's on the committee as well. And so within that, the makeup of the committee and making sure that,
they don't want it in law.
so that has been discussed. Okay. So that and then there's more flexibility if it's not codified with the makeup of the committee and then what we're doing in the committee. So that's why we decided not to go that direction.
Sorry, can I just have a follow-up on that? Because if the purpose in the background, like provide feedback as requested, provide feedback and consideration to the legislature, I don't know if there's something that we can put in there so that sometimes people have a bright idea and they decide we've got to put something those ideas are good, and other times they're an imposition upon everybody. And so I'm just wondering if we can put here somewhere, if the idea is not to put it into law, there's still the provision that the idea is to give consideration to the legislature. And so if there's some sort of a purpose statement about, that this body, and maybe they won't agree with me, maybe this body does want to put something into statewide that, without having open meetings, it's concerning that then they take something to the legislature and we all of a sudden have a bill that then pushes down mandates across the state on certain things. And so I don't know if I'm making any sense, but I'd like to see something in there that shows the intention is not to push measures across the state that are.
That's precisely why I don't want it codified. Because
But I'm not saying not, I'm saying in this policy or whatever it is.
But I'm saying
so that they know.
And I think we can state a stronger purpose, but there's nothing in the stated purposes that said these things will be mandated.
No, but they're talking about sending considerations to the legislature.
Well, which only if it's for funding. I mean,
well, it doesn't say that.
No, but it could be. But I'm saying it only could be for funding. I don't think
right. So I'm saying is if we could create more clear language so that we know we're not.
But I just to be really clear, I don't want it codified. I would prefer it in rule, just the structure, not just the structure, so that it has some kind of legal status. So I don't want it codified. I would like it to be in rule rather than policy. I would, even with the idea that there are security devices that may be discussed, I still think an open meeting is maybe a better approach, because then the people who would like to attend could attend. So I think that's
Carol, you're saying you don't want it codified, and yet this is coming from legislative direction. So is this what, an intent of the legislature for the USB to do this, or I'm still not clear with exactly where this is coming from, and so I don't know what kind of an animal we're really dealing with.
Are we telling you to do things that we aren't?
Well, Senator Milner just had this idea because she was seeing so many things popping up around the state, but it was after the legislative session.
Right.
So there wasn't a bill. So I think she suggested this being whatever her position is these days and kind of a powerful position. And maybe Kristen.
Okay, I'm going to turn some time over to Terry Shoemaker, who knows to help us.
The ideas for all of this came because several of us, including the Superintendent's Association, made a proposal at an interim meeting in June that asked the legislature for funding to help for school safety issues. That's what started it. Also doing a presentation that day, I believe it was also Patty and Superintendent. Okay, and basically, and Senator Milner said to us, as chair of the interim committee, can you guys all get together so that we will receive a request that represent all of the interests that were being discussed that day. So never was there discussion that the state board should take responsibility for this or any other entity. It was more about how we're going to manage the disparate requests that are coming to the legislature from different groups, including me, representing the superintendents, that particular meeting in June. So that's why, and so since then, I want to credit Patty and the state superintendent and others for organizing a committee. Now we've got a chairperson for our committee. Kristen takes that role.
So it's not, you are not, that's not a problem for you.
No, we're not, we don't feel compelled. I don't think you should feel compelled to create board rule here.
Okay.
Even though I would urge you to keep it at the policy level for now.
Okay.
For now. Okay, you can always change that at some other time in the future. The reason was this group is really still getting to know each other.
Yeah.
And you talked previously, me coming in, maybe about expanding it. I can tell you right now, this is a pretty dang large group. Okay, and getting us to come to consensus on a number of things was not all that easy, was it, Christy? Okay, and it took a lot of time and their expertise, and they're both fantastic at it, trying to get us there. So my suggestion is take a look at this as policy, make policy suggestions and not move to board rule yet. I don't know what you two have said, but that's what I'm.
Well, I just wanted the structure and board rule, but I defer to your experience.
Well, I just think in this particular, it's too early.
Okay.
It's too early. We're still trying to feel things out.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
In fact, and I
Is
wanted
that
to,
helpful?
I wanted to, he's not represented. I wanted to add a clarifying point, to exactly what Harry was just saying, is we don't have to reach consensus on everything, but what we do reach consensus on is what we move forward. And so if something does not reach consensus, and as a group we can't agree, then that is dealt with on the individual level. So only things that are agreed upon by everyone is what's promoted.
That's right. And that's what came out.
Well, and this is primarily about getting money too. Right. And that we want to get money in a conservative way, so absolutely.
So I have more concerns now. If we're moving forward based on consensus and we don't have certain populations represented, because once we create this consensus mentality, it's really, really difficult.
So that's the option. I'm just gonna say it.
Well, he just said, okay, you said if the group reaches consensus on something, then you move forward with it.
So yes, but that doesn't mean that an individual group, like if Highway Patrol says this is something that we absolutely want to do, and then the rest of the group says there's a difference of opinion.
Right. I'm not concerned about, anyone can do what they want on their own dime. I'm worried about what's moving forward in the consensus mindset. Because that's what's gonna get to the legislature.
For
And
example, the minimum
if-
guidelines.
Yes, and if we don't have representation from some of these other entities that we've discussed earlier, then it's really hard to beat consensus. So if you've got 16 people and you're saying all these different groups got together and you failed to have some key people that need a voice, they're gonna have a really hard time beating that consensus model, and letting their voice be heard. And that is very concerning to me. And so I would really urge that we look at
opportunities.
that broader.
I wanted to address a couple of things. One, I think that the feedback you're discussing is valid, absolutely. And I think there's a possibility that we need to create some sort of formalized feedback form in which outside voices, public comment, whoever else could submit their concerns or their comments, and that could help guide some of the conversation. Also, the subcommittees form that just went to sleep on me, that
is now in bulk Word docs. So you can pull that up and take a look at that a little more closely.
State of refresh.
Some of the subcommittees, I need to point out, are representatives on the committee. So people who started out as a subcommittee are now part of the reps. So that is another point that I just wanted to make to that. I've been very impressed with the cohesiveness of this group. We are still getting to know each other. We're having conversations that have not yet been had as far as the policies and procedures within other organizations and how it affects the other organizations that we see. And so I think that the conversation happening here today as far as who is there and how those things are being heard is valuable. And I thank you for the consideration on that.
All right.
So one more thought, I'm sorry,
I
this
agree.
is all of a sudden. I've received more emails and personal conversations about this, almost any issue in 2 years. And that's why I would like you to consider with these groups, having this be an open meeting, because all of these individuals, all of my contacts have said, there is a committee meeting, there is something going on. If they could just attend or know that, and if there's a need to discuss security devices, that could be done. Elisa mentioned maybe that could be done in some kind of closed session. That's kind of an oddity, but it's kind of a group, but
you could create norms for your
But
group.
it doesn't seem to me that you need to discuss security devices in a big policy-making committee like this. So if you would just consider, just weigh the pros and cons of letting the public be able to attend this, I think it would help me with my constituents, the people who contacted me to say that there is something you can go, you can see what the state is looking to for recommendations, and if that's for you, I'm not really crazy about defining minimum guidelines is kind of a contradiction in terms.
Right.
Anyway, they're either guidelines or they're minimum standards, but not both. So I would rather it be about funding and about recommendations for LEAs. Bringing the insight of all, because however smart you guys are in GLAB and NEVO, you know, you don't have the benefit of these experts to say, and did you think of that this? So,
But you know what I do like is, I really like the common language, because
Uh-huh.
that would make a huge difference, just from district to district, school to school. I really like.
that's where we're gonna have reporting,
language.
we're gonna have,
Yes.
we don't want the same problem we've seen with
No.
reporting incidents,
Yes.
violence incidents in schools, where the data are useless because
Yes.
are not, because the language isn't common.
You just
So
get a
let's-
common language in a school.
Let's
sometimes it's
start right instead of get the back end.
And Lisa wants to say something.
Again,
No, I was gonna bring up the open versus closed meeting, and if you could create in your group norms of what is a public safety issue and needs to be discussed, more privately, but the more open we are,
They need to be
it's just better for
it's
everyone
too,
involved.
it's too important of an issue.
And I would recommend, if we're the ones that were tasked by Senator Milner to kind of host it, if they could be the same media outlet and use the boardroom so that you don't necessarily have a bunch of people trying to butt into the meeting, but they can observe, they can go back and listen to the conversation, and then if you need to close it down, to talk about specific things that someone has determined, and probably the law enforcement would know when those are public safety risks, or someone could help you come up with a list of things that, okay, when we get into these discussions, we need to not just have an open.
Yeah, I think they need to look at the Open and Public Meetings Act to see what would be, if that is covered, you know, that kind of sensitive information is
It
covered
is.
under the.
Security devices
Security devices.
is one of the
Okay.
things.
Well,
Deployment security personnel is covered under.
So that's gonna work.
But if they're
If you
not,
want it.
if they were,
Yeah.
if they were saying that they were gonna have a closed meeting, which that's what the board policy was saying, it doesn't mean that it's necessarily subject to open public meeting acts if they choose to have open meetings. It's just an entity that's may not be subject to open public meeting acts because you only have
Yeah.
two elected officials. They can make their own norms.
Right.
And that's like, you can use that as a guideline, but
Okay, good.
I look back at the discussions that did occur with the, I guess, description of identity when we're speaking about them. We're going to just need to talk with the members on the committee when they represent an entity, where they would say in my district or in my locality or in my, not be specific, so that we're not knowing what their protocols are or what they're doing behind the scenes for safety reasons. We really have to have some good conversations about speaking the conversations and be identifying.
Well, maybe you'll conclude that it's just too hard and it's a better. I'm just saying, all of us are saying in this committee, we would like, it would put people's minds at rest.
Oh, yeah. 2 board members and we all want to be on it.
So it never, I love that. I'm so happy. It never makes me, it never makes me happy to tell us, I'm sorry, this is a closed meeting. We already have done a couple things when I've been on the board that have been kind of secretive, strong arm things, and I don't ever want those.
We just think if someone who is here all the time, trying to help influence policy in a positive way, I don't see how that happens here, because the way I read the process right now is this committee makes recommendations to the legislature. I don't know where the board is in that. I don't know if things go back to a committee process. I don't know if things are going to be going through a rulemaking process. I don't know where all the policymaking input is once this committee makes some recommendations. So that's really unclear for someone who's trying to, policy.
But we can't help them do that. I guess that's why I like that rulemaking idea too, is because, you've got a process that allows for hearings, that allows for public comment, that allows for, that's kind of, I guess, what it's investing in.
I think it causes a lot of anxiety to think of just this closed meeting and suddenly here, there's guidelines for
Yeah.
it. Nobody's been part of the discussion. It's like, I think it causes anxiety.
Well, it sounds to me like we're not ready to take action on this, and that there are a lot of concerns that have been raised. And, yeah, so I think, can we send this back to the drawing board, and will you take our input and see what you can come up with? I've taken a bunch of notes that I'll be looking for when it comes back again, so. All right, then, thank you for
Do we need
this.
to move that, or is it just?
I don't think we need to move it, it's not
Right.
an item, so we'll, I will make a motion that staff, considering the discussion we've had here today, revamp and bring this back to committee. All in favor, or is there discussion of that motion? Yeah, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All right, that concludes our committee meeting agenda. Would someone like to make a motion to adjourn?
I do think that.
Okay, motion to adjourn. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Thank you. Happy holidays.
Our meeting is usually quick.
Still ready.
Well, I knew that I wasn't gonna go back and forth on Science Day, so I expected that to be fast, but the public had a lot to say, so. Yeah, no, I do. Now they're. Right, well, they're super cool with these
You are the only participant.